So here's the deal. Every fantasy writer or dungeon master eventually hits this point where they go, wouldn't it be cool if my elves had their own language? And then it's followed by immediate panic because they're not Tolkien, probably. They're not a linguist, right? You don't know the difference between a phoneme and a fonzie. I'm so funny. But good news is you don't need a PhD in linguistics to make a fantasy language that feels real. You just need to know a few tricks to fake it. So let's talk about it. Now, the first step of trying to fake a language is the sound. Real languages don't use random letters. They have patterns, and that's the pattern, I would say, is what makes them feel real. So instead of sitting down and inventing the Elvish alphabet from scratch, just pick a few sounds you like and stick with them. So maybe your elves use a lot of the soft L and V sounds, L and V, right? So suddenly Selvion, Alvaris, and Veloren all feel like they come from the same place because they're using sort of the same similar pattern when it comes to the sound of the language. And then meanwhile, you can juxtapose that because your orcs maybe favor the harsh k and g sound, so you get names like Grakthur Korgesh. Already, just by doing that, it feels like two different languages, you know? And you don't have to invent grammar charts to get to that point. So now let's talk about words. And here's the trick. You don't need to build a dictionary. And I'm going to say that again. You don't need to build a dictionary. And I'm telling you this from experience, you don't want to. That's a Tolkien level commitment. And unless you're planning to spend the next 20 years writing the Silmarillion too, you don't need it. So instead of doing that, just build a handful of important words that players will actually hear. And when you're doing that, just think about cultural touchstones, you know, words for home, for enemy, for magic and God. And then you can sprinkle those into your world and into the NPC's language naturally throughout the role playing, and that'll make them feel like there's elements of these characters that we don't fully understand, that there's elements that we haven't learned yet, like you would with a normal person. And I think that's really what makes NPCs go to the next level, is when there's more to be uncovered rather than a two-dimensional thing that like served its purpose. So if you can sprinkle those words in, I think that helps a lot. So for example, the dwarves, let's say that they call ale brun, and your players are going to start picking up on that. You know, every time you go into a dwarvish bar or whatever, and you know, the dwarf, you know, looks at you and goes brun, pointing at them, asking if they want some beer or some ale, and then they can then start using that language, and now it feels like something that has taken on a shape of its own, a life of its own, you know, and that language now becomes real, and you didn't need 500 words, you just needed 10 really good ones. Now the third tip is grammar, and don't worry, I'm not about to break out sentence diagrams and start showing you all of the intricacies of language and grammar structure. The easiest way to make a language, or I guess I should say the easiest way to make a fake language feel authentic, is to pick one or two simple rules and repeat them. So maybe in dwarf, adjectives always come after nouns. So instead of big cave, it's cave big, which happens in a lot of languages. In the real world, if you're interacting with anybody that speaks a second language, you can see that happening all the time. Or maybe in Draconic, every question ends with the word shar, shar, you know, so maybe they'll ask them like, you know, would you like another beer, shar? And then you do that consistently and it feels like grammar because it's again, that repetitive pattern, but you didn't need to write conjugation tables and think about it on that level. All you had to do was just pick a rule and repeat it all the time. And guess what? It starts to sound like grammar. Now, another trick is to steal from real languages and then disguise it. So you can take some sounds from Finnish, or you can sprinkle in some Latin endings, and if you don't like those, then you can borrow from Japanese, right? Like you could even mash them together or change a letter here, and then boom, you've got something that feels unique and believable. So try not to think of it so much as cheating as it's world building with training wheels, because Tolkien did it as well, right? He based Elvish very heavily on Welsh and Finnish and a lot of Anglo-Saxon names. Like you can see the structure, and you could, like, he was a linguist, so he did it. He did the thing that we're talking about right now because he knew that that's a really quick way of doing that. And, you know, of course, you know, with the added bonus of him actually being a linguist, he was able to sort of build on that, but the point stands. Now, really quick, I do want to just take a moment to say thank you to today's sponsor, Describe. And if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I am constantly tripping over my own words. So how do you do that without spending your entire session prepping notes and prepping things for you to read? How do you bring your world to life? Well, that's where Describe comes in. Now, to really help you understand that, here's a minor illusion to perfectly explain it. Wait, it's not working. Why isn't it? Okay, let's just use Describe.
Describe is a massive, professionally written library of descriptions, NPCs, locations, monsters, spells, magic items, and entire scenes ready to drop right into your campaign. And what's cool is that you can search by keyword or filter by vibe, such as dark, romantic, or cursed, and it even integrates with your VTT so you're not having to scramble mid-session. And what I love the most is that you can add your own notes, you can pair entries with music and maps and ambience and sound effects all in one place. So if you want to try it for yourself, check out Describe and use my code FANTASYFORGE at checkout. Yeah, that's more like it.
And then lastly, and this is kind of an obscure one, languages aren't just words. They're part of the culture. And what I mean by that is that, let's say, for example, that your desert nomads maybe have 20 different words for the word sandstorm. That's going to say something about how they live. Maybe they've learned to identify different types of sandstorms, or they see them in different ways. Or, maybe the sandstorms are a goddess in their culture, so the sandstorm in the daytime is a different god than the sandstorm at night. I'm literally just spitballing here, but what I'm saying is that says something about their culture and the way that they carry themselves and the way that they live. So if your sea elves don't have a word for fire, for example, that will say something too. The point of a fantasy language isn't to try and impress a linguist or to impress your players or anything like that. What you're trying to do is tell your players what kind of people you're putting in front of them, and that language is a way to sort of bring that out. So if you can make that language have a meaning, for example, elves might, being from the Feywild, and you tend to associate them with greenery and life and leaves. I don't know why we do that. That's kind of a weird thing. But what I'm saying is that if that's the case, then their words, their language becomes this sort of twisting, viney, beautiful, flowery kind of language versus orcs, as we saw earlier. Orcs are often depicted as being violent and a barbarian culture, a fighting culture. So their language might sound harsher. It might sound more like an attack with the tongue, very guttural sounds, like the K's and the G's. And so that's where you kind of extrapolate that idea. But you can do that a lot through just names as well, right? So I guess that's kind of a weird concept there to end it on. But I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. You don't have to be Tolkien. You don't even have to be a linguist. You just have to fake it well enough that your players believe it. And honestly, that's really what world building is anyways, is just kind of faking it until it feels real. So there you go. That's it. That's all that I have today. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any tricks that you have put to use at your table to help make the language, I don't want to call it a barrier, but help bring language to your games and make them more realistic and make them more fun. I want to know. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, I think it's time to return that book to the Magic Library.
Have a good look around.